What's up, Rockets fans, and welcome back to another video of Rockets Talk. Today I have a fun one. I wanted to go through and do something that I think a lot of us have been doing lately, thinking about this young core, is just think about what each of these players' ceilings are, what their potential is, what's the best case scenario for these players, and then where are their floors. And I'm going to go through what a lot of us are referring to as the Rockets young core, the six players that were recently the top two draft picks going back to 2021. And I'm going to add a seventh in. I'm going to add Kevin Porter Jr. in and talk about him as well. So I'm going to do this in three tiers. I'm going to list out players who I think could be true number one options or core foundational pieces, those guys that could become stars in this league, really be the foundation of a contending playoff team. I'm going to list who I think those guys are. There's three of them. I'm going to list out who I think have the potential to be high-end starters, and then I'm going to list out who I think could be, whether they're low-end starters, if you want to use that term, or even key rotation guys, who I think those players are as well. Now, obviously, I would want every player that I'm listing out to be a high-end starter or turn into a star. We know, realistically, that's probably not going to happen. The key here is, can the Rockets find one or two or even three players that can become these high-end stars and fill those guys, or help fill the roster with players around them that make sense and that fit. And I think the Rockets have a mix of guys that have potential to be the number one option on a team or even the number two option, guys that could be high-end starters, and then guys that could be key rotation players or some low-end starters that really help in other ways as well. So let's start out with Tier 1. Tier 1 is what we really want to look at, and we're going to start with Jalen Green. He was the first pick for the Rockets. He was second overall, but the first pick for the Rockets in the 2021 draft, and really is a key piece for the Rockets, or could be a key piece for the Rockets as they move into Phase 2 under Ime Udoka. So Jalen Green, I think his ceiling is clearly the number one option. When I think about Jalen Green and the role he plays, not necessarily an athletic comp, but the role he plays, I think of a guy like Devin Booker, where ideally Jalen Green will improve his efficiency as a shooter, as a scorer, improve as a defender, at least be a plus defender. Doesn't have to be elite, but be a plus defender, and then elevate his facilitating a little bit more, which he did actually a little bit more this past season. I think there's room to grow that to where, he's not going to be a point guard, a starting point guard for a team. I don't think he will be, but he could be a secondary facilitator, someone that can help move the ball as well, alongside a starting point guard. So I think Jalen Green, his ceiling absolutely is a number one scoring option, a guy you can put the ball in his hands late in a game and ask him to go get a bucket, and he could do that. I think the floor for Jalen is kind of what we're seeing right now. Maybe an inconsistent or inefficient shooter, some streaky performances. Maybe he turns into a key rotation bench player, a guard that you bring off the bench. And we're talking about over the course of his career. Next season, obviously, he's going to be a starter. But where his career could go, I think that's his floor. Is he'd be, a guard off the bench that comes in and gives you about 20 minutes a game or so. But hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully he does, do enough this season to prove that he's a starter and can be a long-term piece for this Rockets team as a key foundational piece of a core playoff, of a core player for a playoff team. So, I think that's the best case scenario for Jalen Green. Someone else that I think could be a foundational piece, it's a guy that a lot of Rockets players like and want to see get him more involved in the offense, especially, is Alperen Şengün. And this is a guy that was actually from that same draft that Jalen Green was in. This is a guy that the Rockets traded up to get in that draft. And that tells me and all of us how much they valued him. They thought he was good enough that they traded up to go get him at 16 in the 2021 draft. Alperen Şengün is a fun player because he's shown flashes of some brilliant play. He's just been a really crafty player on offense, especially down around the post. He's not. I see the Nikola Jokic comparison a lot for Alperen Şengün, and I get it. As a post player, he's a very creative facilitator. He's shown these flashes of being able to move the ball and get the ball in the guy's hands in these really crafty, sneaky ways. I think where Şengün and Jokic are different is Şengün doesn't have the height or the size, at least not right now, that Jokic does. So if he's going to get to that level, where he's a core foundational piece, he's going to have to continue to find ways to be an impactful scorer. And part of that is developing an outside jump shot where he's hitting 3-point shots. And I know that's something he's been working on this offseason. On the flip side, he's going to need to improve as a defender. Now, I don't think he's as poor of a defender as some people say, and I do think there's potential for him to really become a solid defender. Similar to Jalen, he doesn't need to be elite, but he needs to be a plus defender. And I think he's a high IQ player. We see that on the offensive side of the ball. So under the right coaching, under the right guidance, especially underneath someone like Ime Udoka, I think there is room for him to become a plus defender. So I think Jalen Green and Şengün, funny enough, they came from the same draft. I think those are two guys that clearly could become core pieces, core foundational pieces for a playoff team and for a contender. I think at the very least, Şengün, I think his worst case scenario would be he wouldn't be good enough to be a high end starter, but he'd be probably caught in between of like, should he start? Should he be a key bench player? You know, he has these great strengths, but he also has these big limitations, these big weaknesses. So he's a guy that we kind of have to play 20 or so minutes a game, but we can't rely on him to be a starter because he has, you know, these aspects or these weaknesses that really take from the team. I think that would be his floor or where, what his worst case scenario would be. But again, ideally, he continues to develop. If he could develop an outside shot, I think that would go a long way for Şengün. And then if he can improve as a defender and continue to elevate his game as a facilitator, Şengün really could be a core piece moving forward for the Rockets. And I think that was a great pickup for them either way. We know there was a lot of teams that actually wanted to go get him. And I think the Celtics were a team, if I remember correctly. Udoka even mentions that the Celtics were a team that wanted to go get Şengün back when he was going through the draft. So, two guys so far. I'm going to give you a third name of a guy I think could develop or has the potential to develop into a number one option, or at least a high-end core piece, and that is actually Cam Whitmore. Now, Cam Whitmore, as we know, fell to the Rockets at number 20 after being projected to be a top 6, 7, maybe as high as 4 or 5 pick in the 2023 NBA draft that just happened. But I think Cam Whitmore does have the potential skill set and the potential tools to develop into one of those wing players, those small forwards that a lot of teams covet as their number one or even number two option on a contending high-end playoff team. He has great size, he has great athleticism, and if he can stay healthy, knock on wood, he could really develop into a key piece, a key wing player for the Rockets moving forward. And I think that's the excitement around not just getting him in this draft, but the fact that he did fall to the Rockets at 20. They didn't give up any assets to go to get him, even though they were trying to. You have a player that really could develop into not only just a starter, but a key high-end, more than a high-end, one of your core players, one of your one or two options on a contending team. So I think he has the potential to be that. Will he get there? I don't know. Obviously there were some health concerns. He's dismissed those. So one of the keys to his career will be continuing to prove the doubters wrong, all the teams that passed him, that he can stay healthy, he can play, consistently throughout seasons, and play consistent minutes for a team and be relied upon to play those minutes. I think where his floor comes in is, maybe he just becomes a rotational wing. Maybe he's a streaky shooter or inconsistent shooter. Maybe he doesn't develop the playmaking that, still he's not going to be a point guard, obviously. He probably won't be a point forward, obviously. But I think about someone like Jason Tatum. When Jason Tatum came into this league, he really wasn't a facilitator. And he's not the lead facilitator for the Celtics, at least hasn't been to this point. But over the course of his career, you've seen his assist numbers go up from 1 or 2 closer to 4 or 5. And I think now in this day and age in the NBA, your number 1 or number 2 options often are decent facilitators, decent playmakers. They're not just guys that are just going to go get a bucket. They're guys that are going to go make a play, whether that's them getting the bucket, them scoring the points on that play, or them setting up another player to go score that point. So I think for him to really become that true core piece, That's going to be another aspect of his game that has to come into play and really has to develop, because he didn't really show that much in college from a consistency standpoint in that aspect. And then on defense, again, you got to be a plus defender, right? And he really has the athleticism and the size to be what could be more than that, what could be closer to an elite defender, and another guy that, we'll see what Udoka can do with him. At the very least, he could also create a role for himself or a reputation as a plus defender, even if he is a streaky offensive player. But you put all those things together for Cam Whitmore, I think that's a player that really could be a core piece moving forward for the Rockets, or for some team, wherever his career takes him down the line. And it's going to be exciting to watch what Cam Whitmore does in Houston early on. Okay, so those are the three guys I think have right now the potential to be core players if you can, if Udoka and the staff can really help develop them further to reach their potential. One name I didn't include in that is Amin Thompson. And I've gone back and forth on Amin Thompson where I think his potential lies. He's absolutely one of the most athletic players in the NBA instantly. And I understand that. He's also, to me, seemingly so far been a very cerebral individual when it comes to basketball. Apparently, he had his own draft board, and I think that goes a long way. He was already pretty familiar with some of the coaches on the Rocket staff. He was mentioning who the shooting coach was, knowing that he needs to improve his shooting. I don't know that Amin Thompson is going to ever be a number one option on a team, and I don't think he has to be. I think he's a guy that can be a super high-end starter for a team, even if he's not the number one or number two scoring option. He has that athleticism where he can do a lot of the other things at a high level. I think about a guy like, and again, this is not necessarily an athletic comparison, but I think about the role that a guy like Marcus Smart has played during his time in Boston. Has he ever been needed to be the number one or number two guy offensively to go get a bucket? No. But he's been a super high-end starter. He's been a key to a lot of their pretty deep playoff runs. And if Amin Thompson can carve out a role where he is the lead facilitator, he's a good to great to elite defender, which he has the athleticism to do. And then if he can develop some sort of jump shot, some sort of outside shot, even if he's not putting up 20 plus points a game, as long as he's leading the team in a decent amount of assists and helping set up other players, he can be a really high-end starter, even an all-star playing that role. And I think that's the really a realistic goal for Amin Thompson. Now, if he turns into a number one player, a number one option, and really just becomes the guy on a team, I mean, that would be great for him, and I know that's probably what he wants to be. But I think a realistic ceiling for Amin Thompson is becoming a high-end starter whose job is really to set up his players, set up the guys that can go get the buckets, and then help the team in transition, and then help be an elite defender on the defensive side of the ball, and a good rebounder. He's athletic enough to where that's something else that he really should lean into, and I think he will. He seems like a guy that's going to put a lot of effort in on both sides of the floor. So he's in my tier 2 of where the ceiling is as a high-end starter. Another guy I think is going to be a high-end starter, has the potential to be, is Jabari Smith Jr. We know that Jabari Smith is another pretty athletic player at 6'10", 6'11". He's already shown signs of being a good defender, having the potential to be a really good defender in the NBA. And as his shot continues to come on, and we saw that jump shot was starting to come on towards the end of the season. As he continues to develop that's going to really be probably his role, is be an elite defender on defense, especially around the rim, be a guy that can guard a number of different positions up and down a roster, up and down an opposing offense, and then on his offense be relied on the other end of the side of the court, be relied upon to be an efficient shooter. And I think about, and again, this is not an athletic comparison, but I think about the role someone like Klay Thompson plays. Never been the number one option on a team. You could argue he's been the number two. I would say he's probably more of a 2.5 option. But he's a guy that, there's times when he just pours it on during games. He catches fire on the offensive side of the ball. And then he's always been a reliable, pretty good, if not great defender at times as well, especially when he was younger in his career. And I think some sort of role like that would be really where Jabari Smith, probably his ceiling lies, is playing next to a guy who is that number one option. Maybe that's Jalen Green, playing with another someone that can be a facilitator. We know Jabari's not really a facilitator at all. but a guy that's relied upon to be one of the anchors on defense, be a high level efficient shooter on offense, and then help you go get those rebounds, help you do some of those other little things. I think that's where Jabari's realistic ceiling is as a high end offensive player and a really valuable starter. I think at the low end, his floor is, it's possible that his defense would be good but not elite. It's possible that his shooting could be inconsistent. And so if you're an inconsistent shooter, your defense is pretty good. What does that make you? I mean, you might be a little bit of a liability on offense. Maybe you're a key rotation big, or maybe you're a guy that can come in and give 20, 25 minutes a game. I don't think that's the case for Jabari. I think he's closer to being really a high-end starter in this league. He's athletic. He has the mentality for it. He has the dedication on defense. He's aggressive and wants to go prove that he can be a high-end shooter on offense. So I think he's closer to being that high-end starter than anything else. Another guy that I think, so we've talked about, let's do really a recap right here. We've talked about tier one, who I think guys that have the potential to be those core foundational pieces or be those number one or maybe number two options on a team. That'd be Jalen Green. I think Cam Whitmore is in that conversation if he hits his potential, and I think Şengün is there as well. I've talked about guys who I think could be high-end starters, even if they don't turn into number one or those key options on offense. Would be Amin Thompson and Jabari Smith. And now I want to talk about this tier three who maybe they're, I'll call them low-end starters or mid-level starters, guys that guys that have strengths, but guys that you're not going to build a team around them necessarily. And these two names are Tari Eason and Kevin Porter Jr. I'm going to start out with Kevin Porter Jr. because I've had a tough time projecting where his ceiling is. Kevin Porter Jr. to me is a guy that when he flashes his potential, one could say it's elite. I mean, he has some of the offensive moves that he has, some of the ways the ways that he scores the ball, some of his shooting performances. I mean, it really is. He does flash some elite play. The question for him has always been consistency in his production and then his mentality around that as well. And that's more so on the offensive side. The defensive side, we know he can definitely improve on that side of the ball too. So I think where Kevin Porter Jr.'s current ceiling is, maybe he develops into an off-ball wing, a high-end starter as an off-ball wing. I think maybe right now it's closer that he is it looks like he's going to play that sixth man spot. I mean, look at me. I'm trying to describe my thoughts on him, and I'm still going back and forth on my head. But maybe his best fit is a key sixth man type of role. He can come in, he can score, he can come into the game and he can score the basketball in short spurts here and there, or at a decent clip. Maybe not playing starter minutes. But the one other thing about Kevin Porter Jr. that's appealing is, even though I think it's safe to say he's not necessarily a starting point guard in the NBA, he doesn't facilitate or look to facilitate at the rate needed to be a starting point guard, but he still can come in and facilitate the ball, and that's clear. He's had games where he's put up 10 plus assists in a game. And so I think there's value in that. And that goes back to me talking about a lot of the stars and high-end players in today's NBA don't just go get buckets. They're also able to make plays. They're playmakers, and you can count on them. If they're not going to go get the bucket, they can find a guy that will. And that's where I get caught up with Kevin Porter Jr. At his highest ability, he can be that guy. Like, if you were to take all the times that Kevin Porter Jr. was great and apply that across the board, I mean, he would be a guy at the end of games where he'd be one of those guys you go put the ball in his hands and see what play he can make. And I think for him, it's not so much an athletic limitation as it is just his own play style, his own mentality. And so I think right now, maybe this is more of a goal where he needs to get to, and I know I'm not necessarily talking about a ceiling, so this might be a player we debate back and forth after this, but I think a goal for him is, hey, go carve out a really valuable role. Even if that is coming off the bench, go carve out a role where when you come into the game, we know, the Rockets know what they're going to get out of you, and you can be relied upon to go execute that role consistently. I think that's a really realistic goal for Kevin Porter Jr. even if that's a sixth man sort of role, go whatever that role is, go do it at a consistent clip, much more consistent than what the Rockets have gotten out of him recently. I think his floor is kind of what we've seen, where you don't really know where to put Kevin Porter Jr. Is he a point guard? Is he an off-ball player? Can he be a starter? Is he better off the bench? I mean, I think there's he just brings a lot of question marks because he doesn't. There's not one key role that he has displayed that, like, oh, that's him, that's what he is, that's, he's definitely this guy. He's kind of flashed different things, and when he's done them well, he's done them really well. And there's times when he hasn't done them well, it just leaves you kind of scratching your head, like, what is, what's going on here? Where do you play this guy? How do you rely on this guy to be in this position? So I do think Kevin Porter Jr. has a ton of potential. He could, in a funny way, I mean, he could be a guy that really actually does develop into an off-ball wing player that you put the ball in his hands late in games and see what he can do. But I think right now a realistic ceiling for him, a realistic goal, is go carve out a role, even if that's a six-man role, and do it consistently. And I think that's where I kind of stand on him right now. Even if you're not starting, go carve out that role as an off-ball wing, as a key six-man, maybe even a guy that comes in and helps run the offense a little bit here and there. Carve out that role and do it to the best of its ability. I know that kind of turned into a coaching session for Kevin Porter Jr. more than what's his ceiling, what's his potential. But I've had a tough time figuring out what his true potential is. The other guy that I think is really a guy that could be, if nothing else, a key role player or a mid-level starter is Tari Eason. Tari Eason probably is never going to be that number one option or the number two option or a guy that you build a roster around, a playoff roster around. But he doesn't have to be to have a really successful career in the NBA. I think about guys like, especially as their careers progressed, I think about guys like Harrison Barnes and Andrew Wiggins and the roles that they developed into as more of these key glue guys, these key support guys. They've definitely found starting positions throughout their career, especially as it's progressed. And I think when you think about Tari Eason, he does a lot of things well. There's not necessarily one thing that he's going to do at an elite level, and he's not going to be an elite scorer in this league. I don't think that's where he's going to, make a career for himself in this league. But he doesn't have to be. I think he, at the very most, can be a high-end starter. And at the very least, I think he's going to be a very impactful rotation player. And that's why I have him in this tier 3 sort of area. Kind of similar to Kevin Porter Jr., not necessarily about how they both got into this tier for me, but like whatever your role is, go do that at a high level and do that at a consistent level to where when you get those minutes, whether they're starting or you're coming off the bench, you can be relied upon to go do that role at a very high level. So I'm excited to see what Udoka can do with Tari Eason. I think, one of his roles could be a key defender. And if Tari can develop a consistent three-point shot, those players, contenders and playoff teams value those players. Look at a guy like PJ Tucker, who when he came to the league, he probably had a worse jumper and worse offensive shot than Tari Eason does now. But he's developed this role as a key defender, as somewhat of a do-it-all guy. He can get you rebounds. He can do some of the dirty work. He can really help support on offense. And I think that's a really realistic ceiling for Tari Eason as well. And again, his floor would be maybe a just somewhat of a rotation player that kind of bounces around the league and kind of struggles to find his footing. I don't think that's the case. I look at the guys that the Rockets brought in, and to me, they're pretty high IQ basketball players. And those players tend to figure it out. They tend to figure out what their role is, and they tend to do it at a pretty decent clip. So those are the 7 players that we went through. Tier 1, I have Jalen Green, Cam Whitmore, and Şengün. Tier 2, Amin Thompson and Jabari Smith Jr. I know Amin, some people are going to say, hey, he should be Tier 1. I don't think that you can argue against that right now. He has a ton of potential, especially if he develops a jump shot. The sky could be the limit for him if he can develop a jump shot, become an efficient facilitator, limit the turnovers, and be an athletic elite defender. I mean, what more do you want in a guy like that? But right now, for me, he's in a tier 2 as a high-end starter. And then this tier 3 right now is Kevin Porter Jr. and Tari Eason. So I know there's other guys on the Rockets roster like Ty Washington and Josh Christopher, Usman Garuba, KJ Martin, Jay Sean Tate. I'm going to wait to talk about those guys until we see if they're even part of the Rockets' future, at least going into 2023. We know there's some question marks with this team as they transition into phase two. So who knows if any of those guys will be Rockets moving forward or not. Or if one or two of the players that we just mentioned are Rockets moving forward. So we'll see. But it's an exciting time for the Houston Rockets. I think at the very least, this team has done a pretty good job of finding players that have potential to be starters in this league or to be key players in whether they're rotation or role players for contenders. And really, that's all you can ask for. Even obviously moving forward, one of the priorities or the top priority for the Rockets is, are any of these guys capable of being stars? Do we have any cornerstones here? Is that Jalen Green? Is that Şengün? Is that Amin Thompson? Is that Cam Whitmore? Can any of these guys be cornerstone players we can start to build around? If not, can they be high-end starters or key role players that could then attract stars to this team? I think an example of this is Donovan Mitchell going to Cleveland. Cleveland did a pretty decent job of pulling together some high-end starters, some key role players, to where it made Cleveland an attractive destination for Donovan Mitchell. So, and we've seen it happen across the NBA, countless times. So at the very least, the Rockets need to really show, what do we have in these players? Do we have any stars? Do we have a star or a couple stars we can build around? Do we have any high-end starters that we can pair with a star? Do we have any key rotation players? Where are our gaps? Where are our holes? What do we need to fill? And I think that's obviously what phase two will be all about. And I think Ime Udoka is the right man for the job to help the Rockets figure this out and to help Stone understand what else he needs to go get as far as building a team into a competitive playoff team and ultimately a contender. And I think that would be more so phase three. Phase two, let's see what the Rockets have and see what they still need, and then build towards phase three. All right, guys, thank y'all for watching. I'm going to keep doing Rockets content, especially as we get closer to the season, which I know is a ways away. But next up, we'll talk about free agency and maybe a trade or two if those go down for the Rockets. It seems like they're going to be pretty active here in a few days once free agency starts this upcoming Friday. All right, if you like the video, like and subscribe. As a reminder, this is really a general sports channel. I know I have a Rockets Talk playlist where I talk Rockets. As we get closer to football season, I'm going to start talking more about some of the football teams that I follow. I'm going to talk about the NFL. We'll talk about fantasy football. I'm also in a dynasty football league, so we'll talk about that. And we'll just talk about some other sports topics as well. All right, guys, appreciate it. Talk to you later.